Alright friends, adding and subtracting integers. I know it seems easy on one hand and weird on the other hand. Now let's remember, of course, that adding and subtracting integers are really, they exist in the real world everywhere. At a bank, when you deposit money, you're adding. When you withdraw money, you're subtracting. When you're taking the temperature on a cold day and it's below freezing, that is a negative integer below a certain limit, like 32 degrees Fahrenheit or 0 degrees Celsius. And what about sea level? Sea level is a zero starting point, and if you dive under the surface, you are going negative. And if you jump over and out, then you're positive. All right, so let's talk about this a little bit. That's some real life connection. But what if we were to say that we were going to take something like 4, let's make it even easier, 3 plus a negative 1. All right, what would that look like? So we need to think about these counters. This is a positive counter, all right? And we have 3 positive counters, right? And now if I was going to have to add a negative counter, then I'm going to add my negative count over here. And when those two counters meet each other, this is known as a zero pair, right? And I think you've heard of zero pairs before. So that cancels out and leaves us with 2. All right, so that can be a little bit weird, but let's look at another example where we're subtracting a negative. All right, so here's a tricky one. This one sometimes gets a little confusing. Our equation is 4 minus a negative 2. And we need to show that with counters. So here are 4 positive counters. That's this number right here, the 4. And we want to take away 2 negatives. All right? This seems really peculiar, but you can't just take away negatives. When negatives arrive in this situation, they come with their opposite, the zero pair. All right? And as such, when you take away 2 negatives now, those negatives get removed and you end up with 6, right? So this points out an interesting thing about this particular equation is that when you subtract a negative, you in fact add. This thing could be rewritten as 4 plus 2 equals 6. Strange, no? So now let's look at it on a number line. This particular graph or app, as it were, allows us to plug in our numbers up here and it plots it on the number line down here. Pretty handy. So the 4 is plotted like such. It starts at 0 and moves up to 4. That's our 4. Now if we were going to add 4 more, you can see that from the 4 it moves up and we have an answer of 8. All right, now here's the question. What if we subtract more than 4? All right, so now we're thinking about how does this work on a number line. When we start with our plus 4, we jump to 4 spaces on the number line. And then we're going to add, which means we need to move down the number line to the right, except it's a negative number, which means we go backwards. So instead of going forward, we're going to jump back 1, 2, 3 points, and we end up at a positive 1. And if we had a greater number than negative, let's take negative 5. All right, we started at 4, and then it said to add a negative number. Well, because it's a negative, we must go back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we are at negative 1. All right, the last thing here we're going to take a look at. This is a vertical number line, which is very important to think about sometimes. We're usually talking about a horizontal line, but it's important to really see this vertically as well. So this is our equation builder. Right now we have 0 minus 0 equals 0, and you can see 0. All right. If my starting point is going to be, say, at a positive 4, that seems to be our favorite number today, and we subtract nothing from 4, then we're still at 4. But watch what happens if we are going to subtract 7. All right, 4 minus 7. If we look down here, we can see that our starting point was 4, and then from 4, we're going to subtract. On a vertical number line, that means going down. So we go down our 4, 5, 6, 7, and our answer is -3. So that's pretty cool. But watch this. What happens if we start with a negative number, like a -4? Let's take a look at how that impacted things. Our starting point was 0, and then we moved to -4. So that represents -4. Now we're subtracting 7, which means to subtract, we're going to go down the number line 7 spaces. And there we are at -11. All right, are you really ready to see how this goes in the weirdest of ways? Let's subtract a negative number. All right, what does this really mean? When we subtract a negative number, what we're talking about is going down the number line because it said to subtract. But because it's negative, you have to go the opposite direction. So let's see how this starts. Our starting number is -2. So from 0, we're down to -2. Then it says subtract -5. So we want to go down the number line to subtract. That's what it says to do. Except this number is a -5. And because it's negative, we have to go the opposite direction. And it turns out that you end up at +3. -2, -2, minus a -5 equals 3. It is true that, in effect, you can rewrite this equation as -2 plus 5 because it's the same effect. Subtracting a negative is, in fact, an add number. All right, I hope that this was helpful, and we will talk some more about this. Be safe.